This story starts in the late 2000s when I picked up One Piece Grand Battle. Back then, I wanted to unlock everything in My Anime Arena Fighters, a problem that still persists today. So I booted up my family's crappy Windows XP computer and headed to some cheat code sites to see what all there was to do and unlock. Back when games still had cheat codes and well-hidden unlockables, these sites were lifesavers for dumb kids like myself. I easily found what I was looking for, but some of the posts mentioned how to unlock characters I had never even heard of, like Eneru, Foxy, and Aokiji. This was before I discovered the world of One Piece outside of the 4Kids dub or monthly Shonen Jump, which was still on Alabasta at the time, so I had no idea who these characters actually were. But I didn't care. I thought I'd unlocked all the characters already, but it turned out there were even more, so I eagerly booted up my console and followed the instructions these sites gave me. But nothing happened. I didn't get any new characters, so I wrote the whole thing off as a mistake or some joke and moved on. Sometime after, maybe even up to a few years later, I had been playing the sequel, One Piece Grand Adventure, and at this point I was a little more lore savvy, or about as much as I could be for a kid who didn't know what the fuck Japanese was and understood that there were hundreds more One Piece episodes in gibberish but was too scared to watch them because I didn't like reading subtitles. I remember looking up a walkthrough on GameFAQs, and this walkthrough mentioned the differences between Grand Adventure and some game called Grand Battle Rush. Apparently, this so-called Grand Battle Rush lets you play as characters that were supposedly in my game. I did some digging and learned that Grand Battle Rush was actually Grand Battle, at least in Japan anyway. Maybe my dumb baby brain ignored the part on the cheat sites that made the distinction between the US and Japanese release, or maybe that clarification hadn't been made back then. But I soon realized that no one was playing a prank. The people who posted those tips were right, just not in the way I had wanted them to be.
プライド命強がってかなりきりでもいいありったけの笑顔かき集めとびきりの夢も見るのさ昨日より未来そして You gotta be my friend We are on the curve We are We are We are
ワンピースグランドバトル
ダッシュ
One Piece Grand Battle Rush was released on the PS2 and GameCube in Japan on March 17, 2005. The game, themed around the Davy Backfight arc, was the next installment in the series of arena fighters after Grand Battle 3, and it was a pretty significant upgrade in a lot of ways, especially with the presentation. The character models showed more physical features and felt more expressive. All of the game's textures were way more detailed, though one thing I wish would have continued from Grand Battle 3 is the brighter color palette. I think that the more muted colors don't match with the anime's aesthetic at all and makes things look more generic. I do also miss the cute little animations of the Straw Hats fooling around as you select your menu option. The controls and combos have been more streamlined, and while a few things didn't survive the transition, there's no doubt Grand Battle Rush plays way better. Every character now has a support character they can call upon to help them in battle, with some even having multiple to choose from. And though they don't do the flashy cutaway gimmick anymore, I think this game's implementation of level 1 supers makes a lot of sense. And the level 2 supers in this game are also a significant improvement. Each one has a unique backdrop and a unique theme, and these themes really put Grand Battle 3's to shame. My only complaint is that the full cinematic isn't shown unless you're close to losing. I realize the level 2s are supposed to be a comeback mechanic, and it's more than reasonable to have them do less damage when the player using them is doing good, but I don't see why they can't still show the full animation like in Grand Battle 3. Unsurprisingly, this game has more content than its predecessor. There are more stages, more characters, new minigames, and an entirely new mode. The Davy Backfight mode has you choosing 3 characters and participating in 3 rounds of Foxy's devilish schemes. At the start of each round, you wager a support character and proceed to play a random mini-game. If you win, you get an extra support character to choose from for the rest of the fight. If you lose, then you have one less support character to choose from. The second round plays out the same way, and the third round is a showdown with Foxy. Of course, he isn't going to play entirely fair, so he has 2 health bars. Unfortunately, the arcade mode in this game is stripped down. They switched to using drawn portraits of the characters for dialogue, which is a nice change, but aside from that, things are pretty disappointing. The adorable bar style scene from 3 is gone, and there aren't any more in-engine cutscenes. I'm sad to see some of the most charming aspects of 3 gone, but thankfully everything else is bigger and better. First off, the gallery features more cards from the From TV Animation One Piece card game, and by more, I mean 1,137. Oh, praise God, Usopp. There are angels that walk among men, and they happen to be the folks that painstakingly added hundreds and hundreds of high-quality renders of cards from the Japanese versions of a trading card game that I remember owning as a kid but never had the chance to actually play because who the fuck wants to play some shitty anime card?
It's always better to go second because you can't attack on your first turn. All right, fucking, that's great. What? Are you fucking kidding me?
The roster is 19 characters strong with 36 supports. And while that's only 3 more playable characters than in Grand Battle 3, the 4 characters that didn't return were replaced with OGs from the East Blue: Buggy, Kuro, Don Krieg, and Arlong. Returning with the Straw Hats are Smoker, Shanks, Bon Clay, Crocodile, and Enaru. And rounding out the cast, we also have Mihawk, Aokiji, and Foxy. The roster is honestly fantastic, and aside from including Ace, I can't think of a better way to celebrate every part of the One Piece story up to this point. The whole game is just a giant celebration of the Straw Hats' journey thus far. The 9 stages represent the whole spectrum from the East Blue to the Grand Line, and the gorgeous animated intro, set to an alternate verse of We Are, takes us through every major story beat. In all, Grand Battle Rush is a great One Piece game. But a little under 6 months later, on September 7th, 2005, what American fans got with Shonen Jump's One Piece Grand Battle was a butchered product, a less charming, less dense, and less joyful localization. And while I can't seem to find any specific information about this whole debacle, it's clear that between the American wing of Bandai Games and 4Kids Entertainment, someone decided Western fans deserved less of a game. The disappointment starts as soon as you boot up Grand Battle. Gone is the wonderful intro, and in its place is the rap.
Where he goes, we find out by the treasure in the Grand Line, there's no doubt. The pirate whose eye is on it, he'll sing, I'll be king, I'll be pirate king.
That's fine, it's an absolute banger of a song. But for whatever reason, despite Rush's intro looking great, the video in this one is awfully compressed. Even running the game in 1080p with Dolphin doesn't help. And bafflingly enough, this game includes a second intro with an instrumental that uses horribly compressed footage of actual gameplay alongside the animation from Rush's intro. And wow, would you look at that, the animation from Rush isn't compressed at all. But things get even stupider. The card collection is missing, despite the first set of the English version of the card game having already been released in 2003. I wouldn't have expected there to be that many cards available, so I guess that's understandable. But in its place is a One Piece art gallery option, full of 200 random images from the anime that are of poor quality. I'm honestly convinced that 4Kids either never had decent quality footage of the show, or that they didn't care enough to share it, because there's really no other explanation for all of this. Lack of care seems to be a running theme because the voice work is mediocre. Aside from the few characters who always sounded great in the 4Kids dub, like Arlong.
How about a nice room in a dungeon for the rest of your days?
Kuro.
That reminds me, Usopp. I owe you, don't I? For that time that you hit me, remember?
Hee Haw Robin.
Bad call. I didn't know you were such a hot-headed captain.
And Zoro.
It's good to see you, buddy.
everyone else gives performances that are somehow even worse than their work in the show itself. They also didn't bother providing voice work for any of the support or background characters.
Well then, as your captain, I command you to budget our money better.
When this game was released, the aforementioned 4Kids dub had only reached the start of the Drum Island arc, so a decision was made to cut or change content to better match the anime's current point. This was something that happened all the time to anime games in the 2000s. Outside of the obvious changes regarding names and adult themes, the developers also removed and altered content that referenced anything past the main conflict of the Alabasta arc. None of the story mode dialogue makes any references to Chopper or Robin being a part of the crew, and Aokiji, Foxy, and Eneru were removed along with their associated stages, cutting the game's roster down to 16 characters with no replacements. The final 2 characters in this version of the game, Bon Clay and Crocodile, were hidden behind unlock conditions so ridiculous that review outlets of the time like IGN and GameSpot didn't even know there were actually 16 characters in total. If they were willing to go to such extreme lengths to hide these characters who had yet to fully appear, would it have really made a difference to hide the 3 remaining characters from the Japanese version as well? Did they really think someone willing to find it under these long-ass passwords in 2005 would be upset about getting even more characters in their game just because they didn't appear in a TV show? Any costumes for the Straw Hats from Skypiea or the Davy Backfight arcs were removed, replacing the missing costume slot with a recolor. And for whatever reason, Robin had every costume other than her Alabasta one removed. But they didn't even bother changing Robin's ending cutscene, where she's obviously wearing one of the cut costumes. They also didn't remove or change any of her support characters, so Mr. 3 and Miss Golden Week appear despite the 4Kids dub entirely skipping over the Little Garden arc in which they were the primary antagonists. The Sexy Foxy and Arc Maxim stages were removed, and the Mary Joie stage had the background characters replaced with generic spectators. The Davy Backfight mode was renamed to Usopp's Pirate Panic, but funny enough, while they did replace Foxy and crew's appearances in this mode with the Usopp Pirates and generic villagers, they didn't actually bother removing or changing the many Foxy Pirates that appear in the background. Putting aside the obvious mistakes and oversights, you can almost kind of understand where they were coming from, not wanting to spoil or confuse fans. But then I decided to look up the air date for the first episode of the Alabasta arc. Cartoon Network aired its first episode on February 18th, 2006, more than 5 months after the game's release. And as if things couldn't get even more confusing, One Piece Grand Adventure and One Piece Pirates Carnival would go on to release in August and September of 2006 respectively. Both games would end up explicitly including content from Skypiea, an arc that 4Kids would never actually dub, and Pirates Carnival even features voice scenes of characters from arcs that 4Kids had cut from their original run of the series. In both games, it's made very clear that Robin is a Straw Hat, despite the first episode of the 4Kids dub in which Robin was a part of the crew not even airing until July 28, 2007. If they were going to end up leaving in and even commissioning content from later arcs to appear in these games that released 1 year later, why did they even bother making all these changes to Grand Battle? The core gameplay remains unchanged between the American and Japanese versions, and it's still a competent arena fighter even with all of the cut content and ridiculous changes. But after seeing footage online of Grand Battle Rush and even getting a copy of it myself years later, I can't help but feel that Shonen Jump's One Piece Grand Battle isn't even fun to return to these days. If you're at all interested in trying out a Grand Battle game, play Grand Battle Rush or the sequel, Grand Adventure.